to India. And then he cut short that trip, which I thought was kind of strange, to go to Saudi Arabia. Usually the president is not the one who deals with funerals. That's what we have Biden for. But he went to Saudi Arabia to shake hands, I mean, to meet with the guys who wouldn't shake hands with his wife. And I thought when she wouldn't wear the headscarf that she was kind of making the kind of statement that I've been trying to get across here for a long time, which is stop respecting their medieval bullshit under the guise of it's their culture, right? I mean, cultural relativism is nonsense. It's the 21st century. You won't shake hands with a woman, you're the ones who should be embarrassed. And if that's judgmental, good, I'm judging, yes. I'm judging that that's fucked up. And that you're the bigots. I'm not the bigot, you're the bigot.
I think the more egregious thing here was that the president left India saying we've got to have religious tolerance, you have to have respect for women's rights. And he arrived in Saudi Arabia within nanoseconds and didn't mention either of those things, the country that has the worst record on women's rights in the world and the worst record on religious tolerance. Well, and neither of those were raised in the interests of America's realpolitik. And he should have gone there. And if you're going to go, you have to say, this has to improve. You have to raise human rights.
And you're right. I think diplomacy creates strange bedfellows. And the fact is, we have relied on Saudi Arabia for a long time in that region in the Middle East to help us with things like trying to contain Iran, trying to contain ISIS, trying to help us with Russia. And, quite frankly, that means tolerating some things that are grotesque.
I think that speech, however, was a sign of respect for India, actually, because if you can have a conversation like that, a grown-up conversation, it's because you believe that the party on the other side is actually listening. I mean, Saudi Arabia has a culture that it's just a non-starter. To even have these conversations, it's going to go nowhere.
But you can still use your clout. You can absolutely still use your influence.
Especially now that oil is not the weapon it once was.
Well, as of 3 weeks ago, at least, when the price started going down.
Well, it's been a little more than 3 weeks. And we're creating more oil. We are much more energy.
Oil is a huge weapon. I mean, to a certain extent, we've put a bag over Vladimir Putin's head and we're squeezing it tight. We're waging an economic war instead of a literal physical war. So we haven't seen the last of the impacts of oil, and it's going to be huge on a geopolitical scale.
But it was something called the Eisenhower Doctrine back in 1957 that got us involved in the Middle East, and that was the doctrine that said we have to protect our oil supply. But just the way the Cuban embargo is kind of obsolete, I think that's kind of obsolete now. I don't think we need to always be involved in the Middle East like we always were in the past, because I just don't think it's that vital anymore.
And it's not like the track record has been so stellar, right? I mean, America's involvement in the Middle East has not gone particularly well. It hasn't produced an area of the world that is necessarily more pro-Western or pro-American or more peaceful or more democratic. So to the extent that America is involved, it hasn't been the best of experience.
You're right. A lot of our involvement in the Middle East has centered around energy. And as we become more energy independent, and as alternative energies pick up in importance and significance and use, I think you're right. I think you'll start to see more and more of a shift on how we deal with the Middle East.
What do we think the reaction would be if the people in India wouldn't shake the president's wife's hand, or the people in Holland or Argentina? It just is weird that this one part of the world gets a pass that on a story that I think would be just gigantic.
I find that less weird than the president deciding not to raise significant issues about human rights. I do think to some extent if there is a cultural sensitivity over not shaking a woman's hand, then you don't push that particular envelope because it's not going to get you very far. But there are other issues that you can raise.
Listen, I refuse to cover my head at my own wedding. I'm Hindu and it's tradition. And it was just I refuse to participate in any activities that put a woman in a place that she was considered a product that's to be pushed off and sold, the whole dowry process. But at the same token, I just think that it is foolish to go into Saudi Arabia and start taking this very idealistic stance, because we don't need another enemy over there. We have created such a mess over there that there is no way that we can just walk away. How can we walk away? I mean, look at what's happening with ISIS, with Syria, just what can we do about this? And we certainly cannot lose one of our allies.
I do think you have to be culturally sensitive, but I think a lot of Americans were proud that the First Lady did what she did.
Yeah, finally conservatives said, good for you, First Lady.
Even Ted Cruz.
Yeah, even Ted Cruz. Okay,